Paris. March 1941. The scent of spring lilacs drifted through the open window of apartment 14, Rue de la Pampa, mixing with the bitter aroma of chicory coffee. In the mirror above a chipped porcelain basin, a woman named Mathilde Carré studied her reflection with the precision of a surgeon. She was 32 years old, auburn hair pinned back in soft waves, eyes the color of worn jade. In her hand, she held a tube of Guerlain lipstick, Rouge Baiser, a deep crimson that had cost her 3 weeks' worth of ration stamps. She applied it slowly, deliberately. Not too much. Just enough to soften the angles of her jaw, to bring color to cheeks hollowed by rationing. The lipstick was more than vanity. It was armor. It was currency. It was a weapon she would wield against the most dangerous men in occupied France. Outside, the streets of the 16th arrondissement lay quiet beneath a grey sky. German soldiers patrolled in pairs, their boots echoing against cobblestones worn smooth by centuries. Collaborators moved among them, eyes sharp for profit or betrayal. The Gestapo had established headquarters at 84, Avenue Foch, less than a kilometer away. From those elegant Haussmann buildings, fear radiated like heat from a furnace. France had fallen 10 months earlier. The Third Republic was dead. Marshal Pétain ruled from Vichy, preaching collaboration and order. In Paris, swastikas hung from the Eiffel Tower. German officers dined at Maxim's. Jewish families disappeared in the night. The occupation had settled over the city like fog, thick and suffocating. But beneath the surface, resistance stirred. Networks formed in cafés and back rooms. Couriers carried messages across demarcation lines. Radio operators transmitted intelligence to London. Saboteurs cut telephone wires and derailed trains. The stakes were absolute. Discovery meant torture. Interrogation at Avenue Foch. Deportation to camps in the east. Execution at Mont-Valérien. Mathilde closed the lipstick tube and studied herself again. The woman in the mirror looked unremarkable. Respectable. Perhaps a shopkeeper's wife or a secretary at some ministry. No one would suspect that she carried secrets worth killing for. No one would imagine that the lipstick itself was the first piece of an elaborate deception that would keep her alive through 3 years of Nazi occupation. She had learned early that survival meant adaptation. Before the war, she had been a nurse, then a teacher, then a journalist who wrote under a pseudonym about fashion and society. Skills accumulated like layers of skin. The ability to read faces. To modulate her voice. To transform her appearance with nothing more than cosmetics and a change of posture. Now, in occupied Paris, these talents had found new purpose. The resistance had recruited her 6 weeks ago. A contact named Armand, a thin man with nicotine-stained fingers, had approached her after Mass at Saint-Honoré-d'Eylau. His proposition was simple. Gather intelligence. Recruit agents. Run messages. The work was dangerous beyond measure. The pay was nothing. The only reward was knowing that somewhere, somehow, she was striking back at the machine that had devoured her country. But Mathilde understood something her handlers did not yet grasp. In a world where trust was extinct and betrayal meant death, the most valuable weapon was not a gun or a radio transmitter. It was the ability to make people see what you wanted them to see. To become invisible by being ordinary. To hide in plain sight by seeming harmless, feminine, unthreatening. The lipstick was the cornerstone of that illusion. German officers expected certain things from French women. Elegance. Frivolity. A concern for appearance that seemed charmingly trivial. They saw lipstick and perfume as evidence of weakness, of female vanity. They never imagined it as camouflage. Mathilde tucked the lipstick into her handbag beside a folded newspaper and a pair of gloves. The newspaper contained a coded message in the crossword. The gloves concealed ink-stained fingers from transcribing documents. But it was the lipstick that completed the picture. A woman with lipstick was just a woman. A woman who cared about such things in the middle of war was harmless. She descended the stairs, passing Madame Gerard from the 2nd floor, who clutched her shopping basket and murmured about the price of vegetables. Outside, the March air was cool and damp. Mathilde walked with purpose but not urgency. Her heels clicked a steady rhythm on the pavement. At the corner of Rue de la Pampa and Avenue Victor Hugo, she paused to adjust her hat in a shop window, using the reflection to check for surveillance. No shadows followed. No cars idled at the curb. She continued toward Place Victor Hugo, where the metro entrance yawned like a mouth. This was the first test. Every day brought a dozen such moments. The wrong glance. The misplaced word. A face that appeared too often. In the game she had entered, paranoia was not a weakness. It was survival instinct refined to an art. The metro platform was crowded with workers and housewives, their faces blank with exhaustion and acceptance. German soldiers stood near the exit, checking papers at random. Mathilde kept her breathing steady. Her identification was genuine. Her story was rehearsed. She was visiting an aunt in Montmartre. Simple. Forgettable. No one stopped her. She boarded the train, found a seat near the door, and opened her newspaper. The crosswords stared back at her. 12 across, betrayal's reward. 5 letters. The answer was hidden in the third letter of each clue. She memorized the sequence, then folded the paper and stared out at the tunnel walls flashing past. This was how it began. Small acts of defiance. Messages carried across the city. Names whispered in code. And always, always, the performance. The lipstick. The smile. The appearance of a woman concerned only with trivial things. What Mathilde did not yet know was that her deception would grow beyond anything she imagined. That the lipstick trick would become her signature. That Gestapo officers would interrogate her 3 times and release her 3 times, never suspecting that the woman with the crimson lips was one of the most effective intelligence operatives in occupied France. She did not know that her network would grow to 50 agents. That her intelligence would reach London and shape Allied operations. That she would dance with SS officers at the Ritz while carrying stolen documents in her handbag. And she did not know that in 3 years' time, the mask would slip. That the game would end. That the lipstick would betray her in a way she never anticipated. But on that March morning in 1941, as the metro rattled toward Montmartre, Mathilde Carré was simply a woman with rouge on her lips and fire in her heart. She was a shadow moving through occupied Paris. And the shadows, as it turned out, were exactly where the war would be won or lost. By summer 1941, Mathilde Carré had become 2 people. The first was the woman the world saw. Elegant, charming, slightly frivolous. She shopped at the same boutiques every week. She attended concerts at the Salle Pleyel. She was seen dining at Le Grand Véfour with a rotating cast of acquaintances, laughing at appropriate moments, commenting on the terrible shortage of silk stockings. This woman was entirely unremarkable. The Germans who noticed her at all filed her away as harmless. The second Mathilde existed in locked rooms and whispered conversations. This woman coordinated a network of 30 agents across Paris. She memorized train schedules and troop movements. She photographed documents with a miniature camera concealed in a compact. She transmitted intelligence to London using codes she carried in her head. This woman was hunted by the Gestapo, though they did not yet know her name. The lipstick trick had evolved into something more sophisticated. Mathilde had discovered that German officers were disarmed by certain feminine gestures. Reapplying lipstick in public was one. It signaled vanity, preoccupation with appearance, a mind focused on trivial concerns. She used it deliberately, pulling out her compact during tense moments, tilting the mirror just so, refreshing the color with practice strokes. The gesture was so ordinary, so stereotypically female, that it rendered her invisible. But the trick went deeper. Mathilde had begun using different lipstick shades as signals to her network. Rouge Baiser meant all clear. A darker Bordeaux indicated danger. Pale rose signaled that a dead drop had been compromised. Her contacts learned to read her lips the way sailors read flags. A simple greeting at a café, punctuated by the flash of crimson, could convey volumes. The network operated with precision. Armand, her recruiter, had introduced her to others. Henri, a railway worker who monitored German troop trains heading east. Claire, a secretary at the commandanter who photographed requisition orders. Jean-Paul, a printer who forged travel permits and ration cards. Each operated in isolation, knowing only their immediate contacts. If one fell, the others survived. Mathilde served as the hub. She collected intelligence, verified its accuracy, and passed it to couriers who carried it south across the demarcation line into Vichy, France. From there, it traveled by circuitous routes to London. The information she provided was tactical but vital. Garrison strengths. Supply depot locations. The identities of collaborators and Gestapo informers. Piece by piece, she mapped the occupation's machinery. The work demanded absolute discipline. She developed routines that appeared mundane but allowed her to operate unnoticed. Every Tuesday, she visited her aunt in Montmartre, actually a dead drop where she retrieved messages. Every Friday, she attended a hair appointment at a salon on Rue Royale, where she met contacts in adjacent chairs and exchanged whispers beneath the drone of hairdryers. On Sundays, she went to Mass at different churches across the city, using the confessional to pass intelligence to priests who were themselves part of the resistance. Her apartment on Rue de la Pampa became a hub of clandestine activity, though no neighbor would have guessed it. The apartment looked ordinary. Tasteful furniture. Books on the shelves. A record player with a modest collection of recordings. But beneath the floorboards in the bedroom, she had created a hiding place for documents and wireless components. The lipsticks on her vanity table were hollowed out to conceal microfilm. A jar of face cream contained invisible ink. She entertained occasionally, always carefully. Sometimes genuine friends, people who knew nothing of her double life. Other times, contacts who arrived under the cover of social calls. To any observer, these gatherings appeared innocent. Wine was poured. Conversation flowed. But in the bathroom, behind a loose tile, messages were exchanged. In the kitchen, while preparing coffee, documents changed hands. The psychological strain was immense. Mathilde began to feel fractured, as though the two versions of herself were pulling apart. When she laughed at a German officer's joke at a reception, part of her recoiled. When she flirted mildly to extract information, she felt contaminated. But she understood that revulsion was a luxury she could not afford. The work demanded total commitment, a willingness to inhabit the role so completely that even she sometimes forgot where the performance ended. She studied her targets with clinical precision. German officers in Paris fell into types. Some were career military men, professional and aloof. Others were bureaucrats, petty tyrants drunk on newfound power. A few were intellectuals, men who spoke French fluently and prided themselves on appreciating French culture even as they oversaw its subjugation. The lipstick trick worked best on the third type. These men saw themselves as civilized occupiers, not barbarians. They wanted to believe that French women admired them, that occupation could be genteel. Mathilde fed that delusion. She allowed them to mansplain military strategy. She expressed interest in their opinions on art and music. And while they talked, she listened, memorized, and reported. One evening in August, she attended a reception at the German Institute on Rue Saint-Dominique. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and champagne. SS officers mingled with collaborationist officials. Mathilde wore a black dress and crimson lipstick. She positioned herself near a group discussing logistics, nursing a glass of wine, appearing bored but attentive. A colonel named Reiser noticed her. Mid-40s, angular face, iron cross at his throat. He approached with practiced charm. "Mademoiselle, you look as though this evening disappoints you." Mathilde smiled, tilted her head. "Not at all. I'm simply fascinated by how much organization is required to run a city." Reiser's expression brightened. Men like him craved acknowledgement of their competence. "Indeed. You have no idea the complexity. Supply chains, transportation networks, maintaining order. It's a masterpiece of German efficiency." She let him talk. He described troop rotations, mentioned divisions being redeployed to the Eastern Front, complained about logistical bottlenecks at the rail yards. Mathilde nodded at appropriate intervals, refreshed her lipstick once, a gesture that signaled to a contact across the room that she had acquired valuable intelligence. Reiser noticed the lipstick, smiled indulgently, and continued talking. 20 minutes later, she excused herself to powder her nose. In the restroom, she scribbled notes on tissue paper, memorizing the details Reiser had inadvertently revealed. The tissue went into her handbag. The lipstick went back into her purse. When she returned to the ballroom, Reiser was gone, but the information was secure. This was how it worked. 100 small interactions. Fragments of intelligence gathered from careless conversations. The appearance of a woman concerned only with appearance, while beneath the surface, a mind catalogued every detail. But by autumn 1941, Mathilde sensed the net tightening. The Gestapo was becoming more sophisticated. Surveillance increased. Informers proliferated. Networks across Paris were being rolled up, their members arrested and disappeared. She knew it was only a matter of time before her luck ran out. The question was not if she would be caught, but when. And when that moment came, whether the lipstick trick would save her one final time. November 1941. Paris had turned cold. The first snow fell on a Thursday, dusting the streets with white that quickly turned to grey slush beneath German boots. Mathilde stood at her apartment window, watching the city below, a cup of ersatz coffee cooling in her hands. The steam had long since faded. She had been standing there for 20 minutes, motionless, staring at nothing. Something had changed. She could feel it the way animals sense earthquakes before they strike. A shift in the atmosphere. A tightening of invisible wires. 3 days earlier, Henri had missed a scheduled meeting. The railway worker who monitored troop movements, always punctual, had simply vanished. Mathilde sent a courier to his apartment. The building concierge reported that men in long coats had come in the night. Henri was gone. Whether arrested or fled, no one knew. Then Claire stopped appearing at the café on Rue de Rivoli where they exchanged documents. Her secretary position at the Commandanter had been her cover. Mathilde walked past the building twice, watching. New guards. Tighter security. No sign of Claire. The silence was deafening. Jean-Paul, the printer, sent word through a cutout that the Gestapo had raided a forger's workshop in the Marais. 5 arrests. Equipment seized. The forger under interrogation at Avenue Foch. Jean-Paul was burning his presses and going to ground. The network was hemorrhaging. In the span of 1 week, Mathilde had lost 3 agents and 2 safe houses. The mathematics of survival had shifted. Each loss increased the probability that someone would talk. Interrogation at Avenue Foch was methodical, scientific, designed to break even the strongest will. Electric shocks. Water torture. The bathtub technique where they held your head under until your lungs screamed for air, then pulled you up just before you drowned. Over and over. 4 hours. Everyone broke eventually. The only question was how long you could hold out. How many hours you could buy for your comrades to scatter and hide. Mathilde set down her coffee and moved to the vanity table. Her reflection stared back, and for a moment, she didn't recognize herself. The auburn hair was the same. The jade eyes unchanged. But something in her expression had hardened. The mask she wore for the Germans was beginning to calcify, becoming less a disguise and more a shell. She picked up the Rouge Baiser lipstick and turned it slowly in her fingers. The tube was nearly empty. She would need to acquire another, though lipstick was increasingly scarce. Everything was scarce now. Food, fuel, hope. The city was dying by degrees, though the occupation maintained its veneer of order and efficiency. A knock at the door froze her in place. 3 sharp raps. Not the pattern she had arranged with her contacts. Wrong rhythm. Wrong time of day. Mathilde moved quickly, silently. She crossed to the bedroom, knelt, and lifted the loose floorboard. Documents and microfilm went into the hidden compartment. The wireless components followed. She replaced the board, smoothed the carpet, and returned to the living room. The entire operation took 18 seconds. Another knock. More insistent. She approached the door, composing her features. When she opened it, 2 men stood in the hallway. Both wore civilian clothes, but the cut of their coats and the quality of their shoes screamed Gestapo. The shorter one, balding with cold blue eyes, held up an identification card. Mathilde Carré. Yes. Her voice was steady, mildly curious. Nothing more. Criminal Commissar Bleicher. This is my associate, Herr Bauer. We have questions regarding your activities. May we come in? It was not a request. Mathilde stepped aside, mind racing through possibilities. Henri had been arrested 3 days ago. Average interrogation broke someone within 48 hours. If he had talked, they would have come for her immediately. This felt like something else. Surveillance. Suspicion. Not yet certainty. The two men entered, their eyes scanning the apartment with professional efficiency. Bleicher was older, perhaps 50, with the manner of a bureaucrat who enjoyed his work. Bauer was younger, silent, watching her with the intensity of a cat studying a mouse. "Please, sit," Mathilde said, gesturing to the sofa. "May I offer you coffee? Though I'm afraid it's only chicory." Bleicher smiled thinly. "No, thank you. This won't take long." She sat across from them, crossing her ankles, folding her hands in her lap. The picture of a woman slightly nervous but not terrified. Ordinary French citizen confronted by German authority. Confused, compliant, eager to help. "Mademoiselle Carré, what is your occupation?" "I write for a fashion magazine. Articles on style, beauty, that sort of thing. Though work has been scarce since the war." "Indeed." Bleicher pulled out a small notebook. "You were employed before the war as a journalist?" "Yes. For several publications. Society columns, mostly. And before that, a teacher." "Briefly. I found it didn't suit me." The questions continued, seemingly random but carefully designed to trip her up. Her movements around the city. The names of acquaintances. Why she attended mass at different churches. Whether she knew anyone who had expressed anti-German sentiments. Mathilde answered with practiced ease, mixing truth with lies so seamlessly that even she sometimes lost track of the boundary. Yes, she moved around the city frequently. Research for articles. She liked to observe people in different arrondissements. The churches. She enjoyed the architecture. Each one was unique. Bleicher watched her face as she spoke, looking for micro-expressions. Tiny flickers of deception. The dilation of pupils. A twitch at the corner of the mouth. He had interrogated hundreds of suspects. Most revealed themselves within minutes. But Mathilde had spent 18 months perfecting her performance. She knew what he was looking for and gave him nothing. Her breathing remained steady. Her gaze direct but not challenging. When she reached into her handbag for a handkerchief, the gesture was unhurried, natural. As she withdrew the handkerchief, the Rouge Baiser lipstick tumbled out, rolling across the coffee table between them. Bauer leaned forward to retrieve it, his hand reaching. "Oh, forgive me," Mathilde said, snatching it up with a self-deprecating laugh. "How clumsy. One of my few luxuries in these terrible times. A woman must maintain some standards, no?" She uncapped the lipstick and, with theatrical deliberation, refreshed the color on her lips using her compact mirror. The gesture was so quintessentially feminine, so vapid, that Bleicher's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. A fraction of tension released from his shoulders. It was the lipstick trick, deployed in its purest form. The message it sent was clear, this woman cares about her appearance in the middle of an interrogation. She is vain, frivolous, concerned with trivial things. She is not a spy, Bleicher made a notation in his book and stood. "That will be all for now, mademoiselle. We may have additional questions in the future." "Of course. I'm happy to help however I can." Bauer lingered at the door, his gaze sweeping the apartment one final time. Then they were gone, footsteps echoing down the stairwell. Mathilde waited 5 minutes, counting her heartbeats. 147. Then she moved to the window and watched from behind the curtain. The two men emerged onto the street below, conferred briefly, and separated. Bleicher walked toward Place Victor Hugo. Bauer crossed the street and entered a café with a clear view of her building entrance. Surveillance. They were watching her now. She stepped back from the window and sank onto the sofa, her hands finally beginning to tremble. The performance had worked. The lipstick trick had bought her time. But the net was tightening. That night, she lay awake listening to every sound. Footsteps on the stairs. Doors closing. The distant wail of sirens. In the darkness, she reviewed her options. She could flee. Disappear into Vichy France or attempt to reach Spain and eventually England. But running would mean abandoning her network, the agents who depended on her. She could go deeper underground. Sever all contacts, hide until the heat passed. But intelligence had value only if it reached London. Silence meant irrelevance. Or she could continue. Play the role. Maintain the facade. Use the lipstick trick and every other deception in her arsenal to stay one step ahead of the Gestapo. It was not really a choice. She had committed to this path 18 months ago. Survival meant continuing the dance, even as the music grew darker and the floor beneath her feet turned to ice. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering Paris in white. Beautiful and cold and merciless. By morning, 2 more agents would be missing. The crisis had begun. December 18, 1941. 84, Avenue Foch. The building looked like any other mansion in the 16th arrondissement. 5 stories of cream-colored stone, wrought iron balconies, tall windows that caught the winter light. In peacetime, it had housed a wealthy banker's family. Now it belonged to the Gestapo's counterintelligence division, Section 4E, responsible for hunting resistance networks across occupied France. The elegant facade concealed a factory of fear. Mathilde sat in a second-floor room, her wrists cuffed to a wooden chair bolted to the floor. She had been there for 4 hours. No water. No food. No explanation. Just waiting, which was itself a technique. Let the suspect's imagination work against them. Let them envision what was coming. The room was cold. Deliberately so. The radiator sat silent against the wall, though she could hear steam hissing through pipes in adjacent rooms. Cold made people vulnerable, reduced resistance. She could see her breath when she exhaled. They had come for her at dawn. 6 men, Bleicher among them, with an arrest warrant and a list of charges. Espionage. Aiding the enemy. Conspiracy against the Reich. The words meant nothing. Everyone arrested by the Gestapo faced the same accusations. Guilty or not, the charges were pretense for interrogation. She had dressed carefully before they took her, applying lipstick while Bleicher watched impatiently. Even then, even in that moment, she maintained the performance. A woman concerned with appearance. Vain to the last. Now the lipstick was gone. They had confiscated her handbag, her compact, her cigarettes. Everything. She wore only the clothes they had allowed her to keep, a simple gray dress, stockings with a run up the left calf, shoes with worn heels. Her mouth felt naked without the lipstick's familiar weight. The door opened. Bleicher entered, carrying a file folder thick with documents. Behind him came another man, taller, mid-30s, with the chiseled features of a recruiting poster and eyes like chips of slate. His uniform was immaculate, SS Sturmbannführer insignia on the collar, Iron Cross First Class on the breast. "I am Major Kiefer," he said in perfect French. "I command this facility. You will answer my questions truthfully and completely. Your cooperation will be noted. Resistance will be counterproductive." Mathilde met his gaze steadily. Not defiant. Not submissive. Simply present. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. "I don't understand why I'm here. I've done nothing wrong." Kiefer opened the file, spread photographs across a small table. Mathilde recognized them immediately. Henri, the railway worker. Claire, the secretary. Jean-Paul, the printer. Others she knew only by code names. All arrested. All compromised. These people are members of a resistance network operating in Paris. You know them. I've never seen them before. It was a lie, and they knew it was a lie, but that was part of the dance. Make them prove everything. Give them nothing. Bleicher stepped forward, his tone almost gentle. "Mademoiselle Carré, we have been watching you for 6 weeks. We know about your meetings. The churches. The cafes. The apartment on Rue de la Pampa where you store wireless equipment beneath your bedroom floor." The words hit like fists, but Mathilde kept her expression neutral. Confused. Concerned. The mask held. "I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a writer. I move around the city for my work. The churches, I find them inspiring. I'm Catholic. Is that a crime now?" Kiefer leaned against the table, arms crossed. "We arrested Henri Marchand 4 weeks ago. Under interrogation, he provided detailed information about network operations. He described you. Your role as courier. Your apartment as a safe house. Should I continue? 4 weeks. If Henri had broken immediately, they would have arrested her immediately. But they had waited. Watched. Built a case. That meant Henri had resisted longer than most. It also meant they weren't certain. They had suspicions, evidence, but not certainty. They needed her to confirm it. I don't know anyone named Henri Marchand. The interrogation continued for another hour. Questions looping back on themselves. Dates and times. Names and places. Kiefer and Bleicher alternating between aggression and sympathy, the classic Gestapo rhythm designed to disorient and exhaust. Mathilde stuck to her story. Journalist. Writer. Innocent woman caught in a bureaucratic nightmare. She allowed herself to show fear, that was expected, but not panic. Fear made her seem human. Panic would make her seem guilty. Finally, Kiefer stood. You will be held here while we verify your statements. If you are telling the truth, you will be released. If not. He let the sentence hang, then left. Bleicher remained, studying her with the patient curiosity of an entomologist examining a specimen. You play the role well, mademoiselle. But everyone breaks eventually. The question is only time. Then he too departed, and she was alone again. The waiting resumed. Hours blurred together. The room darkened as afternoon faded to evening. No one came. No food. No water. Her mouth was dry, lips cracking. She thought about the lipstick, absurdly, desperately. Not for vanity now, but as a talisman. A piece of armor stripped away. At some point, she had lost track of time, the door opened and a guard entered with a tray. Bread. Weak soup. A cup of water. He set it on the table and left without speaking. Mathilde stared at the food, calculating. Was it genuine? Or another technique? Feed the prisoner, create a sense of routine, lower defenses. She ate slowly, chewing each bite deliberately. The bread was sawdust in her mouth, but her body needed fuel. Survival meant maintaining strength. Night fell. The building grew quieter. Through the walls, she could hear muffled sounds. Footsteps. Voices. Once, a scream, sharp, desperate, quickly muffled. She knew what that meant. Other interrogations were underway. The bathtub technique. The electric shocks. The systematic dismantling of human will. She forced herself not to think about it. Forced herself to breathe slowly, steadily. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. A meditation technique she had learned years ago, before the war, in a life that seemed impossibly distant. The door opened again. Kiefer returned, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 men in shirt sleeves followed him, carrying equipment. Wires. A hand-cranked generator. A metal basin filled with water. Mathilde's stomach turned to ice. Kiefer sat across from her, his expression almost apologetic. I had hoped this wouldn't be necessary. But you leave me no choice. Final chance, mademoiselle. Tell me about your network. Names. Contacts. Safe houses. Make this easy on yourself. She looked at him, and in that moment, she made a calculation. The torture was coming regardless of what she said. They would hurt her to verify information or to extract it. The question was how to use the pain. How to turn it into something that bought time for others. I told you. I'm a writer. I don't know anything about a network. Kiefer sighed and nodded to the 2 men. They moved with professional efficiency. One positioned the generator on the table. The other filled the basin with water, the sound obscenely loud in the silent room. They attached electrodes to her wrists, her ankles. The metal was cold against her skin. Electrical current applied to nerve clusters, Kiefer explained, as though lecturing a student. Calibrated to cause maximum pain without permanent damage. At least, not initially. The human body can endure approximately 14 sessions before complications arise. The first shock hit like being struck by lightning. Every muscle in her body contracted simultaneously. Her jaw clenched so hard she thought her teeth would shatter. The pain was absolute, overwhelming, erasing everything else. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds but felt eternal. Then it stopped, and she gasped for air, lungs burning. That was level 3 out of 10, Kiefer said calmly. Shall we continue? The interrogation became a blur of pain and questions. Shocks followed by brief respites. Demands for information. Names. Dates. Locations. Mathilde gave them fragments. Lies mixed with half-truths. She confirmed things they already knew while protecting what they didn't. She mentioned safe houses that had already been compromised while hiding others. She gave up dead drops that were no longer in use. It was a dance performed in agony. Feed them enough to seem cooperative while protecting the network's core. Scatter false trails. Create confusion. By time. The shocks increased in intensity. Level 4. Level 5. At level 6, she vomited onto the floor, her body convulsing. They gave her water, let her recover slightly, then continued. Somewhere during the 3rd hour, something inside her broke. Not her will, that remained intact, but something deeper. A barrier between self and performance. The woman she had been and the role she played. They fused into something new. Something harder. Something capable of surviving this. At one point, through the haze of pain, she heard herself laugh. Not from humor but from exhaustion and the absurd recognition that she was still alive. Still holding the line. Kiefer leaned forward, intrigued. You find something amusing? I'm thinking about lipstick, she said, her voice hoarse. How strange that seems now. That I once cared about such things. He studied her for a long moment, then stood. We will continue tomorrow. Take her to the holding cells. They unshackled her and half-dragged her from the room. Her legs wouldn't support her weight. Every nerve ending screamed. They descended stairs to the basement, where a row of cells lined a narrow corridor. The door clanged shut, and she collapsed onto a thin mattress that reeked of mildew and fear. In the darkness, Mathilde took inventory. Bruises. Burns where the electrodes had touched skin. Cracked ribs from muscle contractions. But nothing broken. Nothing permanent. She had survived the first session. The question was how many more she could endure. She thought about her network. By now, they would know she'd been arrested. The protocol was clear: scatter, hide, assume compromise. Her disappearance would trigger emergency procedures. Dead drops would be abandoned. Safe houses evacuated. Communication lines severed. She had bought them time. Hours. Perhaps a full day. Whether it was enough, she couldn't know. In the cell next to hers, someone was weeping. Quiet, hopeless sobs that echoed off stone walls. Mathilde wanted to call out, offer comfort, but silence was safer. Any communication could be monitored, used against them. So she lay in the darkness and breathed. In. Out. Still alive. Still resisting. Somewhere above, in the elegant rooms of 84, Avenue Foch, the machinery of interrogation continued. Other suspects. Other networks. The Gestapo worked around the clock, a bureaucracy of torture that processed human beings with factory efficiency. But Mathilde Carré, the woman with the lipstick trick, the shadow who had moved through occupied Paris for 18 months gathering secrets, had not broken. Not yet. The inferno raged around her. And still, somehow, she survived within it. December 22, 1941. 4th day of captivity. They brought Mathilde back to the interrogation room at dawn. Her body was a map of pain, every movement a reminder of what she had endured. But something had shifted during the night. In the darkness of her cell, between bouts of fitful sleep, an idea had crystallized. Desperate, audacious, potentially suicidal. The only way out was through. Kiefer sat waiting, fresh coffee steaming on his desk. The smell was intoxicating, real coffee, not chicory. A deliberate cruelty. He gestured to the chair opposite him. No shackles this time. No electrodes. Just two people having a conversation. Mademoiselle Carré, I believe we have reached an understanding. You are part of a resistance network. You possess intelligence value. The question now is what happens next. Mathilde said nothing. Let him talk. Let him reveal what he wanted. Your network is compromised. Henri talked. Claire talked. Jean-Paul. He made a dismissive gesture. The printer held out admirably, but even he broke eventually. We have safe house locations. Radio frequencies. Code words. Your operation is finished. It was probably true. 4 days was enough time to roll up most of the network. Her agents would be in hiding or already arrested. The intelligence pipeline to London had gone silent. However, Kiefer continued, lighting a cigarette and not offering her one. There is an alternative to Ravensbrück. Ravensbrück. The women's concentration camp north of Berlin. A name that had become synonymous with slow death. You could work for us. The words hung in the air between them. Mathilde let her expression show shock, then careful consideration. Inside, her mind raced. This was the opportunity. The impossible gambit. Work for you how? Your network is broken, but your contacts with London remain potentially valuable. We want you to continue transmitting. Under our supervision. Feed them information we provide. Draw out other networks. You would be a useful asset. It was a classic counterintelligence play. Turn the captured agent. Use them as bait to catch bigger fish. The Gestapo called it Funkspiel, the radio game. They had done it successfully across occupied Europe, turning resistance networks into German intelligence operations. Mathilde pretended to struggle with the decision. She let tears well in her eyes, not difficult, given her physical state. She wrapped her arms around herself, the picture of a woman pushed past her breaking point. If I refuse? Ravensbrück. Or execution. I can arrange either. She bowed her head, letting the silence stretch. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, what would you want me to do? Kiefer smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. First, you will provide us with every detail of your network. Complete transparency. Names, locations, methods. Then, you will resume contact with London. We will script your transmissions. You will be monitored at all times. Any deviation from our instructions. He drew a finger across his throat. I understand. Excellent. He pushed a pad of paper across the desk. Begin with your immediate contacts. Real names, not code names. Mathilde picked up the pen. Her hand trembled, partly from exhaustion, partly theatrical. She began to write, her mind working 3 steps ahead. The gambit required perfect execution. She would feed them information, yes. But carefully curated. Old safe houses. Compromised contacts. Intelligence that appeared valuable but was actually worthless or already known. And buried within the cooperation, she would build a new deception. More sophisticated than the lipstick trick. A performance within a performance. Over the next 3 days, she gave them hundreds of details. Kiefer and Bleicher took notes, cross-referenced information, verified facts against what they had extracted from other prisoners. Mathilde mixed truth and lies so seamlessly that they couldn't separate them. She confirmed things they already knew to build credibility, then misdirected them on everything else. The wireless transmission was the key. London used specific security checks, deliberate mistakes in transmission that verified the operator wasn't compromised. If those checks were absent, London would know the operator had been captured. The Gestapo knew this. They also knew that most captured operators revealed the security checks under torture. Mathilde revealed one check, a deliberate misspelling of a specific word. But she didn't reveal the second check, hidden in the message structure itself. If she could transmit without the Gestapo noticing, London would know she was operating under duress. They would play along, feeding false information back, while understanding that everything was theater. It was a razor's edge. If the Gestapo discovered the deception, she would die. If London didn't recognize the warning, they would trust German intelligence posing as resistance. If she made the slightest error in either direction, the entire gambit collapsed. On December 28, they brought her to a room in the attic of Avenue Foch. A wireless set sat on a small desk, already powered and calibrated. A technician stood nearby, headphones on, monitoring transmission frequencies. Bleicher watched from the corner, arms crossed. Kiefer handed her a typed message. Transmit this exactly as written. No deviations. Mathilde studied the text. It was routine intelligence about troop movements, most of it accurate. A test to see if London accepted her transmission. She sat at the wireless, fingers hovering over the key. This was the moment. Everything depended on the next 60 seconds. She began tapping out the message in Morse code, her rhythm steady and familiar. The message London would hear was exactly what Kiefer wanted them to hear. But embedded in the transmission structure was a subtle variation, an extra pause between certain letter groups, a slight acceleration in others. To the German technician monitoring the audio, it sounded normal. But to London, trained to recognize her specific transmission patterns, the variation would be screaming, "I am compromised. This is not voluntary, *." She finished the transmission and sat back. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cold room. Well done, Kiefer said. Now we wait for their response. The response came 6 hours later. London acknowledged receipt and requested additional information about German naval activity at Brest. They were playing along. They had recognized the warning. Relief flooded through Mathilde, but she kept her expression neutral. The game was now a three-way deception. The Germans thought they had turned her. London knew she was compromised but pretended otherwise. And she stood in the middle, feeding each side what they expected while protecting what truly mattered. Kiefer was pleased. Excellent. You will continue transmitting. Daily reports. We will provide the content. You will have limited freedom of movement, under escort, to maintain your cover. Your apartment has been searched but left intact. You will return there under surveillance. It was more freedom than she had dared hope for. The Gestapo's arrogance worked in her favor. They believed they had broken her, that fear and pragmatism had turned her into a cooperative asset. They didn't realize that the woman sitting before them had become something new. Not the civilian who once applied lipstick in cafes. Not the resistance courier who had operated in shadow. But something forged in the basement cells of Avenue Foch. A double agent who answered to no one. Over the following weeks, Mathilde resumed a careful version of her former life. She transmitted daily, always under supervision. She attended meetings with German officers, now openly as a collaborator. She provided intelligence, all of it carefully calibrated garbage approved by London through covert channels she established using her one unsupervised moment each day, the bathroom. In the bathroom of her apartment, behind the loose tile, she found that her contacts had left messages. Tiny strips of paper with instructions from agents who had survived the purge. They knew she was compromised but had decoded her wireless warnings. They were using her as much as the Germans were. She became a conduit for disinformation flowing in both directions. The Germans fed false intelligence to London through her. London fed false intelligence to the Germans through her. And buried within the noise, real information still flowed, resistance agents moved unseen, sabotage continued, the Underground Railroad evacuating Jews operated in the spaces her deception created. But there was a cost. To maintain her cover with the Germans, she had to appear as a genuine collaborator. She attended receptions at the Ritz. She was photographed with SS officers. Her name appeared on collaboration lists. Other resistance members who didn't know the truth began calling her traitor. Some marked her for assassination. She lived in a liminal space where everyone wanted to use her and no one trusted her. The woman in the mirror became unrecognizable. She no longer owned herself. She was a mask wearing a mask, performing for audiences who each believed they were the only ones seeing the truth. And through it all, the lipstick remained. She had requisitioned a new tube, the Germans provided it as part of her cover maintenance. She wore it to every meeting, every transmission, every performance. It had become something different now. No longer just camouflage, but a reminder of who she had been before the world turned inside out. January 1942 became February. The war ground on. The network she had helped build was gone, but seeds of new networks were sprouting in the spaces her deception protected. London used her transmissions to feed the Germans false information about Allied invasion plans. The Germans used her to track resistance activity that was carefully choreographed to lead nowhere. And Mathilde Carré, the woman with the crimson lips, walked the tightrope between three different wars. The one fought with bullets and bombs. The one fought with codes and lies. And the one fought inside her own mind, between survival and honor, between collaboration and resistance, between the person she had been and whatever she was becoming. The turning point had come. She had survived the inferno not by escaping it, but by learning to live within the flames. March 1943. 15 months after her capture. The deception had become unsustainable. Mathilde stood in her apartment, the same apartment on Rue de la Pampa where her double life had begun, and stared at the wireless set now permanently installed in her bedroom. German technicians had wired it directly into Gestapo headquarters. Every transmission was monitored in real time. Every word she tapped out in Morse code was heard simultaneously at Avenue Foch. The fiction of her freedom had worn thin. She was no longer a double agent playing both sides. She had become something more degraded. A puppet. A broadcast station for German lies. It had happened gradually, then suddenly. London had maintained the fiction for months, playing along with the radio game, using her to feed disinformation back to the Germans. But over time, the quality of intelligence had degraded. The Germans had become suspicious that they were being played. They tightened controls. Demanded more. Pushed her harder. And Mathilde, exhausted from maintaining three different personalities simultaneously, had begun to crack. The signs were subtle at first. A missed transmission window. A moment of hesitation before following orders. A look that lasted a second too long when a German officer mentioned recent resistance activity. Individually, these moments meant nothing. Collectively, they painted a picture of someone losing control of their masks. Kiefer had noticed. During their last meeting, he had studied her with renewed suspicion. "You seem tired, Mademoiselle Carré. Perhaps the strain of serving two masters is becoming difficult." The comment had been casual, almost sympathetic. But underneath was a threat. He suspected she was still in contact with genuine resistance elements. He suspected London knew she was compromised. He suspected the entire operation was theater. He just couldn't prove it yet. But he was watching. And Mathilde knew that once suspicion took root in the Gestapo's mind, proving innocence became impossible. The question was not if they would move against her again, but when. The final collapse began with a photograph. On March 14, a resistance newspaper, printed on clandestine presses in the Latin Quarter, published a list of known collaborators. Names. Addresses. Photographs. Mathilde Carré appeared on page 3, seated next to an SS Standartenführer at a reception at the Hotel Muris. The caption read, "Traitor. Spy for the Germans. Marked for execution." The photograph wasn't false. She had attended that reception under Gestapo orders, maintaining her cover. But the resistance members who published it didn't know about the triple game. They saw only surface truth. A French woman dining with the enemy. The publication changed everything. Her usefulness to the Gestapo had depended on her credibility with both sides. Now, openly branded as a collaborator, any remaining resistance contacts would avoid her. The Germans could no longer use her to infiltrate networks. Her value had evaporated. Kiefer summoned her to Avenue Foch the day after publication. She climbed the familiar stairs with leaden feet, knowing what was coming. He sat behind his desk, the newspaper spread before him. "It seems your former comrades have rendered judgment. I've sacrificed everything for you," Mathilde said, letting desperation color her voice. "I've done exactly what you asked. This isn't fair." "Fair?" Kiefer laughed without humor. "You're a spy, mademoiselle. Fairness is irrelevant. What matters is utility. And yours has expired." He let the statement hang, watching her reaction. "So what happens now?" "That depends. How honest have you been with us? Have you revealed everything? Or have you been playing a deeper game?" It was the question she had dreaded. The accusation she couldn't defend against without revealing the truth. "I've given you everything." "Perhaps. We shall see." He nodded to guards standing by the door. "Take her to the basement. Cell 7. The familiar descent. The familiar corridor. But this time felt different. Final. They locked her in a cell smaller than the first one, barely large enough to lie down. No window. No light except what filtered through the door slot. The walls were scratched with messages from previous occupants. Names. Dates. Prayers. Final words. Hours passed. Then days. They brought her food once daily, thin soup and bread, then removed the bowl and left her in darkness. No interrogation. No contact. Just isolation designed to break whatever remained of her spirit. In the darkness, Mathilde confronted what she had become. The mask she had worn for so long had fused to her face. She could no longer remember which version was real. The journalist who had started this journey. The resistance courier with rouge on her lips. The collaborator dining with SS officers. The triple agent serving 3 masters. All of them were real. None of them were. She had survived by fragmenting herself into pieces, each one performing its role, none of them whole. And now, in the darkness and silence, those pieces refused to coalesce. She was no one. Everyone. A collection of lies that had forgotten the truth. On the 5th day, the door opened. Bleicher entered, carrying a folder. He sat on the floor beside her, a strange gesture that felt almost human. "The war is not going well for Germany," he said quietly. "Stalingrad has fallen. North Africa is lost. The Reich is beginning to understand that victory may not be inevitable." Mathilde said nothing. Where was this leading? Smart people are preparing for what comes after. Making arrangements. Building relationships with those who might show mercy when the tide turns. He opened the folder and showed her documents. Identification papers. Travel permits. Money. Spain is neutral. From there, you could reach Portugal. Perhaps even England. These papers would get you across the border. It was an offer. An escape. But nothing came without cost. What do you want? Insurance. When Germany falls, if Germany falls, I would like to be remembered as someone who helped. Who showed mercy. You could provide testimony to that effect. It was pathetic and human and desperate. A Gestapo officer hedging his bets, trading a prisoner's freedom for potential clemency at a future war crimes trial. If I take these papers and run, Kiefer will hunt me down. Kiefer doesn't know I'm here. This conversation never happened. He stood, leaving the folder on the floor. Think about it. You have 24 hours. The door closed, and she was alone again with an impossible choice. She could run. Use the papers Bleicher provided. Reach Spain, then England. Finally tell her story to Allied intelligence. Explain the triple game. Clear her name. But running meant abandoning any remaining agents who still operated in Paris. It meant letting the Gestapo believe they had won. Or she could stay. Refuse the offer. Face whatever came next, likely transfer to Ravensbrück or execution. But staying meant maintaining the fiction a little longer. Buying time for others. Protecting the networks that had sprouted in the ruins of her original operation. In the darkness, Mathilde reached into the pocket of her dress, they had allowed her to keep it, and found the lipstick tube. It was battered now, the color nearly gone. She uncapped it and ran her finger over what remained of the rouge. The lipstick trick had saved her a dozen times. Had fooled German officers into seeing a harmless, vain woman instead of a spy. Had become her signature, her armor, her reminder of who she was before everything burned down. But it couldn't save her now. The masks had all been stripped away. The performances had ended. What remained was just a woman in a cell, alone with her choices. She recapped the lipstick and held it tightly. By morning, she had decided. August 25, 1944. Liberation Day. Church bells rang across Paris. The sound was deafening, joyous, almost violent after years of occupation silence. In the streets, crowds surged around American tanks and French resistance fighters. Tricolors appeared on every balcony. People wept, embraced, sang the Marseillaise until their voices cracked. But in a holding facility in the 15th arrondissement, Converted hastily from a school into a processing center for collaborators, Mathilde Carré sat in a classroom-turned-prison cell and listened to the celebration she could not join. She had survived. Against every probability, she had lived through the final 18 months of occupation. Bleicher's offer had been genuine, he had disappeared into the chaos of German retreat. Kiefer had fled Paris in July, eventually captured by the Soviets. The Gestapo headquarters at Avenue Foch had been liberated 3 days earlier, its basement cells opened to reveal horrors that made the city weep. But survival had come with a cost. The resistance had arrested her within hours of liberation. Not as a hero who had played a dangerous triple game, but as a collaborator. The evidence was overwhelming. Photographs with German officers. Testimony from resistance members who had seen her at receptions. Her name on Gestapo payroll documents discovered at Avenue Foch. She had tried to explain. The triple deception. The coded transmissions. The intelligence that had reached London despite her capture. But her explanation sounded like the desperate lies of a traitor trying to escape justice. The reality was complex. The evidence was simple. And in the chaos of liberation, complexity was a luxury no one could afford. Outside her cell window, she could see the Eiffel Tower, finally free of the swastika that had hung from its peak for 4 years. The sight should have filled her with joy. Instead, she felt only emptiness. A guard opened the door. A woman in Free French Forces uniform entered, carrying a folder. Captain Therese Martineau, assigned to investigate collaboration cases. Mademoiselle Carré, I've been reviewing your file. I've told you everything. Multiple times. Yes. Your story is remarkable. A civilian journalist who became a resistance courier, then was captured and turned into a triple agent playing both sides. It sounds like a novel. It's the truth. Martineau sat across from her. Perhaps. But truth is complicated right now. Paris wants justice. People are angry. They want someone to blame for 4 years of humiliation. Collaborators are being executed in the streets. Some deserve it. Some don't. The line between resistance and collaboration has become very thin. She opened the folder, revealing documents. I found some corroboration. Decoded transmissions from London that suggest they knew you were compromised. References to a controlled source in Paris that could be you. But it's not conclusive. And even if you were working for the Allies, you still attended German receptions. You still dined with SS officers. You still appeared to be exactly what you're accused of being. Because that was my cover. That was the only way to. I know. I understand. But understanding and proving are different things. Martineau closed the folder. Your case will go to trial. The evidence against you is substantial. The evidence for you is ambiguous. The outcome is uncertain. She stood to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, I believe you. I think you did what you had to do to survive and continue resisting in the only way available. But belief isn't evidence. And right now, Paris needs clarity more than truth. After she left, Mathilde sat in the silence of her cell and confronted the final irony. She had survived the Gestapo by becoming a master of deception. Now that same deception condemned her. The lipstick tube sat on the small table beside her bunk. They had returned her personal effects after arrest. The tube was empty now, the last traces of rouge long since used up. She picked it up and turned it slowly in her fingers. How many times had this simple object saved her life? How many German officers had seen the gesture of applying lipstick and dismissed her as harmless? How many times had it completed the picture of a woman who cared only about appearance, hiding the mind that recorded every detail, every secret? The trick had worked too well. She had convinced everyone, Germans, French, perhaps even herself, that she was something other than what she truly was. And now, when the masks finally came off, no one could see the face beneath. Over the following months, her case wound through the chaos of post-liberation justice. Some resistance members testified on her behalf, confirming that intelligence had flowed through her even during German control. Others condemned her as a traitor whose collaboration had cost lives. The trial, when it finally came, was brief. The prosecution presented photographs, testimony, documentation. The defense presented theory, interpretation, context. The judges, exhausted French officials trying to process thousands of collaboration cases, rendered judgment based on what they could prove, not what they suspected. Guilty of collaboration. Sentenced to 15 years in prison. It was lighter than it might have been. The ambiguity in her case had bought her mercy. But it was still a condemnation. Her name would appear in history books alongside genuine collaborators. The nuance of her situation would be lost in the broader narrative of occupation and resistance. In her cell at Fraynes prison, where she served her sentence, Mathilde wrote hundreds of pages detailing everything that had happened. The recruitment. The network. The capture. The interrogations. The triple game. She wrote with obsessive detail, as though by recording every moment she could somehow make others understand. But even as she wrote, she knew the truth. The story was too complex. The deceptions too layered. The world wanted simple narratives. Heroes and villains. Resistance and collaboration. There was no space for someone who had been both, neither, something in between. She served 7 years before being released in 1951. By then, the world had moved on. The war was fading into history. New conflicts had emerged. No one cared about the details of occupation-era intelligence games. Mathilde disappeared into obscurity, living under an assumed name in a small apartment in the provinces. She never wore lipstick again. The gesture that had once been armor now felt like a costume she had finally been allowed to remove. She died in 1970, largely forgotten except by a handful of intelligence historians who still debated whether she had been a hero, a traitor, or something more complicated than either label allowed. The lipstick tube, empty and battered, remained among her few possessions. The museum that eventually acquired her papers displayed it without understanding its significance. Just another artifact from the war. A woman's cosmetic. Nothing special. But to those who knew the story, who understood what that simple tube represented, it was something else entirely. Evidence of a war fought not with guns but with deception. Proof that survival sometimes meant becoming something you could never fully explain to those who hadn't lived through it. A reminder that the most effective weapons are sometimes the ones no one recognizes as weapons at all. The story of Mathilde Carré is not about heroism. Not about redemption. Not about justice. It's about the impossible choices made by ordinary people trapped in circumstances where every option leads to compromise. Where survival means betraying someone, yourself, your comrades, your enemy, perhaps all three. The lipstick trick that gave this documentary its title was real. A French intelligence operative named Mathilde Carré, codenamed La Chat by some sources, did indeed use feminine appearance and stereotypes to move through occupied Paris undetected. She was recruited by resistance networks. She was captured by the Gestapo. She was turned, or appeared to be turned, into a collaborator. What happened in the gray space between capture and collaboration remains disputed by historians. Some evidence suggests she became a genuine double agent, feeding disinformation while maintaining covert contact with Allied intelligence. Other evidence suggests she simply broke under torture and collaborated to survive. The truth, most likely, is that both are true. That she was a woman who did whatever was necessary in each moment, accumulating compromises that became impossible to untangle. That she survived by fragmenting into pieces that could never be reassembled into a coherent whole. The Gestapo arrested approximately 800 resistance members in Paris between 1940 and 1944. Most died in concentration camps or before firing squads. Those who survived often faced accusation and suspicion from their own communities. The line between collaboration and resistance, between survival and betrayal, was razor-thin and constantly shifting. Thousands of women like Mathilde moved through occupied Europe during the war. Some were couriers. Some were spies. Some were nurses, secretaries, teachers who found themselves recruited into networks they barely understood. They used the tools available to them, including the stereotypes and dismissiveness of their enemies, to accomplish missions that male agents could not. Their stories are difficult to tell because they resist simple narratives. They did not storm beaches or pilot bombers. They sat in cafes and applied lipstick and memorized train schedules. They survived by becoming invisible, by letting their enemies underestimate them, by weaponizing assumptions about feminine frivolity. And when the war ended, many found themselves condemned for the very compromises that had allowed them to resist. The real Mathilde Carré was released from prison in 1951 after serving 7 years. She lived another 19 years in obscurity. French intelligence files partially declassified in the 1990s suggest, but do not prove, that she did maintain contact with Allied operations even after her capture. That the radio game was indeed a triple deception. That her collaboration was theater. But suggest is not confirm. And in the absence of certainty, history has rendered an ambiguous judgment. What remains certain is this: a tube of lipstick was found among her effects when she died. Guerlain Rouge Baiser. Empty. Decades old. Preserved as though it mattered. Perhaps it was simply a keepsake. A reminder of youth before the war destroyed everything. Or perhaps it was something else. Evidence of a technique that had saved her life a dozen times. Proof that the smallest details can carry the weight of worlds. A weapon no one recognized as dangerous. The occupation of Paris ended 80 years ago. The men who hunted resistance networks are dead. The networks themselves have dissolved into history. But the questions remain. How do you judge someone who survived by deception? Who betrayed some to save others? Who wore so many masks that no one, including herself, could remember which was real? There are no satisfying answers. Only the recognition that war creates situations where honor and survival become mutually exclusive. Where doing the right thing means doing terrible things. Where the only moral choice is to keep living, keep resisting, keep moving forward even when every step leaves you compromised. Mathilde Carré applied lipstick in front of Gestapo officers and let them see exactly what they expected: a French woman concerned with trivial things. A civilian in over her head. Someone harmless. And while they looked at the lipstick, she memorized the conversation. Recorded the details. Transmitted the intelligence. Fought back with the only weapons available to her. For 3 years, the trick worked. Then it didn't. Then she spent the rest of her life trying to explain a game so complex that even she had lost track of its rules. That is the story. Not of heroism, but of survival. Not of victory, but of endurance. Not of justice, but of the gray space where justice becomes impossible to define. Somewhere in a museum storage facility in France, a battered tube of Guerlain lipstick sits in an archival box. No one looks at it. No one understands what it means. It's just another artifact from the war. A woman's cosmetic. Nothing special. But for those who know the story, who understand what that lipstick represented, it remains what it always was. Evidence that sometimes the most powerful weapon is the one your enemy never sees coming. That survival is its own form of resistance. That the war fought in shadows is no less real than the one fought in daylight. And that a woman with crimson lips and secrets in her heart could fool the Gestapo for 3 years, one application at a time, until the masks finally slipped and the truth, whatever truth remained, was revealed as something too complicated for simple judgment. The lipstick tube sits silent in its box, holding secrets that will never fully be known. Just like the woman who carried it through the darkest years of occupation, surviving by becoming invisible, resisting by appearing to surrender, and paying the price for a deception so perfect that even freedom could not restore her name.